live on Sky News Australia. The Rita Panahi Show.
Welcome to the Rita Panahi Show. Coming up tonight, New South Wales Police tell you not to believe your lying ears. Penny Wong hits back at the opposition leader, accusing Peter Dutton of trying to score a cheap political hit. And the great Douglas Murray will tell us about his interview with Benjamin Netanyahu. And there's plenty more coming up, including lefties losing it. But first, Victorian authorities must take swift action to dismantle a camp set up by Indigenous activists in King's Domain. Prominent activist Robbie Thorpe, the uncle of Senator Lydia Thorpe, is among those who have set up a camp in the inner city park and vowed to remain there until their demands are met and the area is handed over to the Indigenous community. Now, let's get one thing clear. King's Domain is for all Victorians. Always was, always will be. Or at least it should be, unless we are betrayed by milquetoast politicians desperate to appease the unappeasable. Victoria Police must remove the activists as they will remove any other group. How long do you think you or I would last if we pitched a tent and started a fire in the middle of the Botanic Gardens or in Royal Park? These activists are demanding King's Domain be renamed and handed to the Indigenous community, with Mr Thorpe vowing to remain in the park until his demands are met. He said, "We want to call it Camp Sovereignty, or its proper name, Yalukit Willem. We're the proper custodians. The land needs us and we need our land. If we don't win here, we've got nothing to go to. Where do you go for a dose of Aboriginal culture close to the CBD?" Well, there are plenty of options, Mr Thorpe, including the Bunji Laka Aboriginal Cultural Centre at Melbourne Museum, thanks to the largesse of Victorian taxpayers. That would be the same taxpayers that activists claim are living on stolen land. The same Victorians who voted against further racial division in rejecting The Voice. Australia voted in October and the verdict was emphatic. In every single state and territory, with the exception of the out-of-touch bureaucratic class that makes up the ACT, every single state voted against the racial division and privilege The Voice represented. Australians don't want a country where your ethnicity determines your rights and entitlements. Last week, we saw protesters in New South Wales, including a number of Indigenous Australians, call on the New South Wales government to remove climbing bans and to properly investigate claims over Mount Warning, after a 2023 report claimed the mountain played a sacred and spiritual role in local Indigenous culture. In New South Wales alone, there are more than 40,000 outstanding Aboriginal land claims, including for prime waterside land. It would be wrong to assume that the actions taken by Mr Thorpe and other radicals is supported by all Indigenous Australians. But too often that is the simplistic view offered by the media, who uncritically accept and regurgitate whatever tripe the activist class feeds them, whether it's mangling the English language to avoid using gendered pronouns or adopting political terms like First Nations. Our institutions have been corrupted by the excesses of far-left ideology with its poisonous oppressor and oppressed narrative. It is evident in academia, government bodies, the bulk of the media, and increasingly the corporate world. To see the likes of Woolworths and Tennis Australia and AFL clubs continue to push divisive racial politics on Australia Day was disappointing but not surprising. But there needs to be a cost associated with this activism, the sort of cost Bud Light and more recently Rip Curl have paid for their daft virtue signalling on trans issues. Corporates are free to opine on all sorts of contentious social and political issues, but the consumer is also free to make purchasing decisions in response to that activism. And who can blame consumers for not wanting to hand over their hard-earned to companies that hate their values? There are plenty of other companies that will happily take your money without pushing their toxic ideology down your throat. Let's get across the news of the day with Nick Cater from the Menzies Research Centre. Nick, we'll start with Peter Dutton saying he's ready to negotiate with Labor on their broken tax promise. Here is what he had to say earlier today.
Your own electorate is among those who are going to benefit greatly from these changes to the tax cuts, some 85% of them. You don't want to take money away from them, do you?
And we're not going to. I've been very clear.
So you're not going to stand in the way of these changes as a party?
I've been very clear that the Liberal Party is the party of lower taxes. We always have been. We always will be.
Nick, should he stand firm and defend the Coalition's original tax cuts, which are already legislated?
Well, he should stand firm and defend the Liberals' original tax cuts, but at the same time, I'd be very unhappy if a Liberal leader or a Liberal party stood in the way of tax cuts of any kind. That's not a good look. So I think the best thing is to negotiate to try and get this package better. Of course, the opposition does not have control of the upper house, and so can be outnumbered, but it should fight its hardest in the upper house, and then promise to reinstate the tax cuts in full when it gets back into government, which the way the Albanese government's going won't be that long.
Now, the Foreign Minister, Penny Wong, is hitting out at the opposition leader, accusing Peter Dutton of trying to score a cheap political hit. Her office has mounted quite a strong defence of the minister after Peter Dutton called for her to step down after the UNRWA funding scandal. How do you see this unfolding? I mean, her position is safe. She is not going to step down.
Well, no, but I think she should. I think this is scandalous that they push ahead with this funding. Does Penny Wong know, by the way, Rita, that it was the New York Times that broke this story, right? It's one of the friendly papers on her side of politics. And it needs to be taken notice of. Joe Biden's certainly taking notice of it. I think it'd be a very odd position. And a lot of European countries, it'd be very, very odd position if we just thumbed our noses and said, well, look, there's no consequence to this. We'll carry on funding. I mean, it's the kiddies, after all, when we really know now. We've known for a long time, but there's more details in that New York Times report and in the Wall Street Journal that show that these facilities were being used to harbour terrorists, and that members of this UN body participated in the massacres of October the 7th last year.
Now, Israel's ambassador to Australia, Amir Maimon, has accused the Albanese government of forgetting Hamas's culpability for the ongoing humanitarian crisis in Gaza. He posted a series of comments on X, formerly Twitter, where he wrote, "At a time when Australia is coordinating with like-minded partners as well as UNRWA in response to the damning evidence of UNRWA employees participating in the October 7 massacre, it's worth thinking about the following. It's been 118 days during which the UN, its General Assembly and its many agencies have failed to condemn Hamas." And he went on to say the UN and many of its member states, including Australia, voted for a humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza that would only help Hamas to reorganise. There is certainly fractures in this relationship with one of our closest allies, Nick.
And these predate October the 7th, as you know, Rita. You know that they've shown a particularly cold attitude towards the Israelis, as far as I can tell, and particularly the approaches from the Israelis early on in their term of government to assist with defence cooperation. I mean, we could dearly do with some of that Iron Dome technology if China and North Korea were to carry out what they can do with their ballistic missiles. So, look, it's been a terrible relationship. But, of course, what's happened is October 7th, and what you and I see is a very clear moral dividing line between the civilization and barbarism. This is separating out the wood from the chaff, isn't it? Is that a right expression? You know what I'm trying to say? Because Labor is certainly coming down on the wrong side of this argument. It's trying to equivocate. It's trying to wrap itself up in some kind of moral yoga competition, to try and twist this way and that. But of course, unless you are explicitly backing Israel and condemning Hamas, then you are in effect doing the bidding of Hamas.
Now, just quickly on this incredible development today. New South Wales Police saying there's no evidence "Gas the Jews" was ever chanted outside the Opera House during a protest on October 9, 2 days after the terror attack. Let's have a listen. Nick, what's your response to that? And I can just see people seizing on this, but the alternative, we're told, is that they were saying, "Where are the Jews?" which is sinister. Are they hunting for members of the Jewish community who, let's not forget, were told to stay away from the Opera House because their safety could not be guaranteed?
I mean, for the last 4.5 months, it seems the New South Wales Police has been just deliberating over which particular hateful anti-Semitic trope was chanted and whether they should go. They should be getting on, grabbing some of those people who've clearly identified by video and charging them. We'll let the courts decide if their evidence stands up. But look, I mean, nobody's disputing that a word beginning with F, that if I was to say it now on your show, would probably bar me for life from Sky Television. Nobody's disputing that that was said in relation to one particular group, ethnic and racial group, the Jews. That's offensive enough. And as you say, I find "Where's the Jews" really sinister. And as you know, I mean, I've got Jewish friends who've really found this extraordinarily trying and don't feel safe outside their own homes anymore because there is this kind of activity going on in the streets.
And there were people there who have signed stat decks saying they heard "Gas the Jews." So there's also their evidence, which should be taken into account. Now, let's move on to this story from The Australian. Again, worrying development. Energy producers are saying that $10 billion worth of gas projects are under threat from legal claims by green activists. Our power bills are already high, Nick. They're heading up higher, and this isn't going to help matters.
Yeah, this is a deliberate tactic, as we know, by the Green lobby. They've got very, very good at it. And they've got a lot of money to do it with. They've got American money. I mean, Get Up, for instance, they received almost $500,000 from the Sunrise Foundation, which is linked to very shady or should I say opaque philanthropic sources overseas. They took that money, according to the statement made this week by the Australian Electoral Commission, and they're using it for this lawfare. But not what, of course, is really galling, Rita, is that government money is being used to fund the Environmental Defenders Office, which is running these cases to make Australians poorer and to stop us getting the energy which we desperately need. And good on Peter Dutton for pledging to abolish that funding when he gets into government.
But how far behind are we? We need to be pressing ahead with exploration, with mining, to keep up with demand. How far, even if there is a Dutton government in the near future, we're behind the 8 ball. We've got no nuclear energy to speak of, and we're shutting down our most reliable and cheapest sources of energy.
Exactly. Gas is going to be the thing which keeps the lights on for at least the next 10 to 15 years, Rita, because as you know, nuclear, even if we decided tomorrow, which we should, will take some time to install. No longer, of course, no longer than it would take putting offshore wind incidentally. But we need this now. The coal-fired power stations are not being repaired. They're not being renovated. They will close down one by one. And we need baseload power. And the only thing we've got available to us is gas. But look, we have one of the largest reserves of gas in the world. We are the 3rd largest exporter of LNG. There are huge new sources that have been discovered and are being explored up there in the Beetaloo Basin, probably 25 times more gas than there was in the Bass Strait. So, you know, with the gas is there. Just need a government that actually opens the way for companies to get in and get it out the ground and get it into generators and into our homes.
Now, a different story for us tonight. A Melbourne gym has introduced a new rule banning tripods. This is a move that has upset influencers who like to film their workouts. This is Doherty Gym, and we love that gym. That's a proper gym for people who take their fitness seriously. What do you make of this? I mean, this is an issue because these influencers not just set up these tripods that can sort of get in the way, but they're invading other people's privacy because they may be filming themselves doing lunges, but if you're trying to work out in the background, you end up on their content on social media.
Yeah, look, I'm totally against narcissism in all its forms, right? So I wish they wouldn't do this, but I'm not sure that I want regulations and rules to ban narcissism because of some danger that, I don't know, somebody might be caught in a compromising position in the background. Look, by all means, anybody, and I'll throw this offer out, film me whenever you like when I'm in the gym, if you can find me in the gym.
That's the solution right there. If you don't go to the gym, you can't be filmed at the gym. Genius, right. Nick Cater, thank you so much for your time this evening. Oh. Now, John Pizzuto's legal team has unleashed on Moira Deeming. More on that in just a couple of minutes. But first, lefties never seem to learn. Surfwear brand Rip Curl has already backtracked after facing an almighty backlash after they replaced a brave female surfer with a trans woman in a marketing campaign for its women's range. The backlash saw people vowing to never buy Rip Curl again. Some folks even burnt their existing Rip Curl collection. Stephanie Bastian from Women's Forum Australia joins me now. I've been watching the backlash online, Stephanie, and Rip Curl, I think, had no idea what they were getting into. I don't understand how they could be so blindsided, how they could be so ignorant of the activism they were entering into. But at least they've realised their mistake and they have apologised.
Yes, they have apologised, and you would have thought after Target, Bud Light, even Terry White, which was an Australian chemist brand that went woke on the whole gender issue, you would thought they would have learnt their lesson by now. What you have is a female CEO who has spent her entire career advocating for female surfers, fighting for equal pay when it comes to prize money, running organisations and groups to increase female participation in surfing. She has turned around and she has let women down. Now that she's the top of an organisation, she's Rip Curl's first CEO, mind you, first female CEO, and she's let women down by pushing this woke agenda. And Australian public have said no. They've said they've had enough. It's affected everyday mum and dads who buy this brand, who spend time and money getting their kids into sport. You know, Rip Curl is a iconic, or was an iconic sporting brand, very popular amongst Australians. And now that they've come out pushing this woke agenda, this toxic woke agenda, they've said no, and they've pushed back in a very strong way. Rip Curl, of course, have gone to ground. They have issued an apology, but we've heard absolutely nothing from Brooke Farris, the CEO. She is refusing to do interviews. She's refusing to apologise. And really, as a woman that has pushed fairness and equality in this surfing sport, she should be coming out and making a statement.
Absolutely. Now, lawyers for opposition leader John Pizzuto have launched a scathing attack on Moira Deeming, exiled Liberal MP Moira Deeming. What do you make of that? Their first court date is coming up. Moira is taking action against John Pizzuto, accusing him of defamation. This issue has certainly split the Libs parliamentary party, but when it comes to their voters, Stephanie, I'd argue the overwhelming majority stand with Moira Deeming, not their Victorian leader.
Look, I think John Pizzuto's, what came out today was a classic case of victim blaming. The Nazis turned up, they gate crashed our rally. A rally for women, speaking about women's rights. We had nothing to do with the rally, yet Pizzuto's legal team today are arguing that they turned up to attend our women's rally. They had a megaphone there, they were speaking over the women trying to speak, and there's been absolutely no investigation as to why Vic Police let them walk through in the first place. I think the public are sick of this. John Pesutto should come out and apologise. He was wrong. He got it very wrong. Even his court documents state that they recognise that Moira, in the after party where she was allegedly celebrating, that she was very uncomfortable with the fact that the Nazis are there. He got it wrong. People are not going to take him seriously as a leader until he comes out and apologises and puts this matter to bed.
I think you've just given him some very sound advice, and I just don't think he's electable whilst this hangs over his head and several other issues, but certainly this one has had quite an impact. Stephanie Bastian, thank you so much for your time this evening. As the border battle between the Biden administration and Texas continues, the Biden administration is setting records for illegal arrivals, with more than 300,000 crossing the southern border last month alone. And the impact is being felt far and wide, including in blue cities in the Democrat heartland of New York. The locals are finding that the terrible policies they support in election after election are having some grim consequences. The NYPD is up in arms after a group of migrants attacked police officers in Times Square. Now, arrests were made, but get this, all of them were released without bail. And just look how sorry this lot are for their actions.
NYPD making 2 more arrests, illegal immigrants, and that attack on officers. Those suspects also allegedly stole an officer's cell phone. Well, that'll help them track you down.
Filmmaker Ami Horowitz joins me now from New York. Ami, that looks like a campaign ad for the Republicans. Tell me about the reaction locally.
Yeah, you know, it's amazing. First of all, I have to give it to the border states for one of the greatest pieces of political theater I have ever seen in my life. I thought it was political theater when they began the process of moving the illegals from the border states to the blue cities. Turns out it's not political theater, Rita. This is one of the great political moves I have seen in my lifetime. It has literally turned around people who live in blue states who didn't fully understand the border issue. Generally, now it's in their face. I came from a cocktail party earlier tonight, and when I walked the subway in Midtown Manhattan, it was full of illegals lying across the tracks, or where people are standing in order to get the subway. Look, it's not just me seeing this, it's everybody who lives in New York. They see this. It is insane, and this is having deep electoral problems for the Biden administration. You know, Anna Kasparian, who is a left-wing voice on the Young Turks, a left-wing media organization, she came out saying these people should have been deported. Didn't applaud her. She was excoriated across social media. And by the way, Rita, when they were released without bail, remember, New York is a very liberal state. They fled our state because it wasn't leftist enough, and they went to California because they know they're going to be safe there. It is a totally insane proposition.
Well, they went from one sanctuary city to another. And you're right, it's time that these blue cities actually see the consequences of these policies, because too often it's those border towns that have to deal with it. Now, Texas Governor Greg Abbott, he's declared an invasion at the border. He's not backing down from this fight at all, and he's got 24 Republican governors standing with him. The country is split.
It really is, and it's very hard to stomach and to watch. You have a constitutional crisis going on between Texas and the federal government. I don't like to see that, but the reality is, and this is a Democratic-led problem. And yes, the country is split, but it's not as split as one would think. This is not really a 50-50 issue. This is more like a 60-40, maybe 70-30 issue. 70% of this country, and by the way, the largest single issue in the country, right? The border issue has now passed inflation and economics. That's how dire the situation is. 70% of the country thinks he's mishandling this. And his electoral prospects really rest on minorities, right? This is the coalition that Obama built that took him into office twice. And this is the coalition that was able to bring Biden into power and to replace Donald Trump. But the problem is that 60% of Hispanics think that Biden is failing at the border. Hispanics think he's failing at the border, and almost 50% of the Black community think he's failing. This is not a recipe for success. It's a recipe for failure. It's really not 50-50, Rita. This is really a majority issue going in favor of the Republicans, and this will hurt and damage Biden, the Democrats, in the general election. No question about it.
Oh, will damage them, but you do wonder whether some of those demographics, they're unhappy with Biden and his handling of this critical issue, whether that's going to be enough to them to vote Republican. I think a lot of those Hispanic voters will, but you look at the African American vote and it still seems to be, Army, pretty solid behind the Democrats. We're going to have to speak to you about this again. Army Horowitz, thank you so much for your time today.
Always a pleasure.
Coming up next, a huge edition of Lefties Losing It, and the great Douglas Murray joins me. Welcome back. Now it's time for Lefties Losing It. Now let's start with a preschool teacher who appears thoroughly confused, and no doubt the poor kids she's teaching will be just as mixed up as she is when she's through with them.
I am starting a new job on Monday, and it's a teaching job, so the kids are going to call me either Mr. or Mrs. Jamie. It depends on what I want, but I, as a non-binary being, I don't know what to pick. I feel like Mrs. would be easier for the kids, but Mr. makes me feel better, but I also kind of want to try mix, but I don't know if the kids can do that. I don't. And then what do they do when they ask me if I'm a boy or a girl? I'm not. I don't know.
Explain that it's young kids, too.
It's young kids. My class is going to be 4-year-olds.
She claims she's not a boy or girl. She's teaching 4-year-olds. Good luck, kids. Now to a Californian Democrat. This lefty losing it is hilarious because he's brought his own posters along. And this dude, Robert Garcia, claims that Trump wants to use alligators in moats to stop illegal immigration.
I want to remind the public that Donald Trump and House Republicans also have their own ideas for the border. So let's review the majority's border ideas that they've actually presented. Here they are. Donald Trump actually has said that he wants to build alligator moats along the border. That's one of his incredible ideas.
Sounds pretty awesome, really. The Democrats continue to be Trump's biggest campaigners. Now, here's another lefty losing it, a trans activist harassing a retail worker for internet clout. He demands, or I should say she demands, the bewildered employee supply tampons for men. I mean, this chick doesn't want pink packaging on her sanitary products.
All right, out here shopping for tampons, but they don't have the tampons for men in yet. I'm gonna ask.
Hey, excuse me, sir. So I found your normal tampons, but I'm actually looking for tampons for men today. Where would those be at?
Let me see what you got.
I got these.
Okay.
But I want the ones for men, not those.
I don't see the word woman on here. I think these are the ones for men.
No, you see how it's all like pink and purple? I'm not trying to pay the pink tax on this. I just want normal tampons. You know, like the ones marketed for men.
For men?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I just wish these narcissists would not harass retail workers and film them and share it on social media to try to shame them. It is just such ugly, ugly tactics. And you know what? It's not winning their movement any fans. Now, joining me is your favourite best-selling author of inspired works, including The Strange Death of Europe, The War on the West, and The Madness of Crowds, one of the finest thinkers of his generation, Douglas Murray. You sat down with Benjamin Netanyahu for a fascinating interview. He spoke about Israel's willingness to go it alone if need be in destroying Hamas, and he said they were on course.
Remember, this war is ongoing. We're in its fourth month. It took the U.S. and its allies 9 months to vanquish ISIS to vanquish the radical Islamic forces in Mosul. Mosul is smaller than Gaza, didn't have this vast terror underground infrastructure, had fewer fighters. So we're on course, but it's going to take some time.
Douglas, he is under enormous pressure, both at home and internationally. What did you make of his resolve?
Yes, we sat down for half an hour in Tel Aviv. And one of the interesting things about him is that, of course, he knows he's under this incredible international pressure, including from America, to wrap up the war in Gaza. But he also knows that Israel has been through multiple rounds of wars in Gaza. And every one starts again because the conditions for the next war are effectively laid down in the ceasefire of the previous one. He knows that if Hamas is left in any way standing, they will regroup, and in another couple of years, the same thing will happen again. And so he's trying to fulfill his objective of destroying Hamas. At the same time, and I asked him about this, he's trying to negotiate for the release of the remaining hostages, the remaining Israeli hostages. That's an incredibly hard conundrum right there. Then when you add in the likelihood, in my view, of war in the north with the Hezbollah armies amassed on the southern Lebanon border and much more, you know, this is a remarkable and a challenging time for anyone, but particularly, I think, for Israel, particularly for him.
And what's the climate at home? Is he supported? Are people questioning his judgment, or are they backing this effort?
Well, polls show only about a quarter of Israelis wanting him to remain on. That's at the moment. He would say in relation to that, well, that's polls, and I don't really care. Of course, as the most successful prime minister in Israeli history, the most long-running prime minister in Israeli history, of course, he's always kept an eagle eye on the polls and his own opinion ratings. Mm-hmm. He was very careful. I pushed him on the question of personal culpability for October the 7th, for the multiple failings that clearly went on the Israeli side that allowed such a barbarous attack to get into Israel. He was unwilling to be pushed on that very much because he knows that if he says, I'm sorry, or I take responsibility, his political opponents will use it against him immediately. He's obviously going to have problems within his coalition whenever the war winds down. So yes, I mean, but I asked him about this, and I asked him about his political future. I said, you know, is it the case with you, as it is with many politicians, that their careers end in failure? And his response was, I don't care. He said, I just want to do what's right for this country, and the rest, he said, the sands of time just wash away.
Now, you better get on the phone and tell Bibi to implement an immediate ceasefire, because the Chicago City Council, led by Mayor Brandon Johnson, has just passed a ceasefire resolution. That happened yesterday. Let's have a look.
Yeah!
Does this idiocy still surprise you? The cheering, the clapping, a city council passing a resolution for a ceasefire in a Middle East conflict. What do Israelis make of the reaction in the West, not just in the US, but UK, Australia as well?
Well, I have to say, by the way, watching that footage from Chicago, it reminds me of your previous segment, Rita. I mean, these are narcissists parading themselves, but they're not doing anything. Israel, like any other country, wouldn't be voted into a ceasefire because of the council in Chicago. Of course, it's just grandstanding and posturing, but it's very ugly, of course, because these people who've been doing this have been doing it from day one. They've been doing it from October the 7th, October the 8th itself. All these people called for a ceasefire of Israel before Israel's even fired anything. But I mean, personally, I think that it'd be much more useful for the citizens of Chicago to urge the Council of Chicago to call for a ceasefire in Chicago, because Chicago has one of the highest gun crime rates anywhere in America and in any developed country. You can have just, I mean, it's not even mass shootings, just individual shootings that add up to dozens of people wounded in an average weekend in Chicago. So I would urge them to look to home before they decide that they've got home so well sorted out that they can also afford a foreign policy in Chicago.
Good advice there. Now, you've written a piece today for The Spectator where you say the Tories have nothing to run on. What do the modern Tories stand for? What has happened to their conservative credentials?
That's a very good question. It's entirely unclear what they do stand for at the moment. Rishi Sunak seems to have made banning disposable vapes his main ambition of late. And I've always liked to think that the country could do more than that. But, you know, it's very strange. As I say in the piece, it gives a different meaning to the fag end of a Tory government. But the strange thing about the Conservatives is they've been in power for 14 years now. They've rotated through prime minister after prime minister. All of them have this increasingly glazed look on their face. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that they just have proved to be so weak in office. I mean, just this week, we heard that a Conservative MP is going to stand down because of threats to his life from jihadists, the burning of his office by some extreme Muslims, and the fact that his colleague Sir David Amess was killed by an Islamist who was apparently also going for this guy. And everyone's like, oh, it's sad that he has to stand down. I think, no, it's disgusting and disgraceful for our country that we would be in this position. But you know, this is a case on issue after issue. Immigration, they say stuff and then they don't do anything. They said they would reduce immigration to the lowest since the 1990s, and it's gone to historically high levels, closer to 1 million a year net than tens of thousands. So I think that, but I think very quickly, I think that the main thing is, Rita, that they've run out of the possibility of promising people a better life. The left runs on envy in its politics, and the right needs to run on aspiration. That you don't envy the other guy, work hard and you'll get what the other guy has. And the Conservatives have not been able to do that because, among other things, they haven't been able to create a property-owning class among people in their 20s and 30s. So, you know, they've been in power for 14 years, and the question is, what did you do with it?
Well, exactly. They keep winning elections, but they governed like a Labor government. Look at the energy policy, look at the far left indoctrination that's evident in the education sector, in the bureaucracy. Even the counter-terrorism efforts have been compromised by leftist ideology, as you recently discovered.
That's right. And, you know, there's no excuse really for having, after 14 years in government, complaining that the civil service is left-wing. And, you know, I just think, obviously, you should have worked that out very fast and had something to make sure the civil service was impartial, which is what it's meant to be. It's not meant to be left-wing or right-wing. It's just meant to be impartial and institute government policy. But yes, this excuse doesn't really run anymore, because you say you've been in power. What have you done with it? And the immigration thing is the most deadly on that. David Cameron said 15 years ago, when he was running to be Tory Prime Minister, he said that he would reduce net migration to the tens of thousands. And here we are at the far, far away point from that. And, you know, at the next election, nobody will vote Labour with any great pleasure. Labour doesn't have very many ideas, or if it does, it's keeping them to itself. But no one will vote for Labour with pleasure, but nor will they want to turn out for the Conservatives, for a party, I think, that's let them down so many times.
Well, we've got a cost of living crisis in many Western countries, but it's immigration, and particularly illegal immigration, that is becoming the critical issue in the UK and in the US, as we discussed earlier on the program. Douglas Murray, so good to speak to you again, and we'll speak to you next week. Thank you for joining me tonight. Don't go anywhere. Coming up next, New South Wales Police tell you not to believe your lying ears. And why is the Albanese government so scared of a royal commission into Australia's COVID response? That's up next. Welcome back. Well, you won't believe this. New South Wales Police have wrapped up their investigation into anti-Semitic chants during a pro-Palestinian protest outside the Opera House. According to their forensic analysis, there's no evidence the crowd chanted, "Gas the Jews." Instead, they say the phrase used was, "Where's the Jews?" Here's a reminder of what happened. Alon Kasutan, Zionist Federation of Australia CEO, joins me now. Alon, what's your reaction to today's developments?
Look, I think it's a real shame. And to be honest, as an Australian Jewish person, I would not have wanted to be there on that horrible night where there was a vile protest with angry people shouting disgusting things at my people. And as a Jew, as an Australian, I would have been terrified. I would not have wanted to be anywhere near that. And this is outside the Opera House, where Jews should be able to be walking around. And so if a mob of angry people are shouting disgusting things just 2 days after one of the most violent attacks on my people, where 1,300 Jews were murdered, raped, taken out of their homes, children were slaughtered, and Israel had not even taken a single form of action. It begs the question, are we prepared to tolerate that as an Australian society? So looking at the developments today, I think it doesn't really matter what that crowd was chanting. It is clear that they had violent intent. It is clear that they were behaving in a way that is disgusting and un-Australian. And I would like to hope that most Australians would feel sick to their stomach looking at those images.
Now, we have seen plenty of anti-Semitic and threatening chants since then. You posted this video of a protest at Flinders Street Station in Melbourne. Now, what are those activists chanting? And tell me why it caused you particular concern.
Well, Rita, they were chanting Intifada, Intifada. And for those who may not know what Intifada is, it means a violent uprising. And it's actually the name given to two extremely violent waves, one in the 80s and one in the 2000s, where Islamic terrorists went on a murderous rampage and murdered thousands of Israelis. Now, I lived through two of those intifadas. I have friends who were on buses on their way to school and were blown to bits by Islamic terrorists. And so to see a violent mob taking over Flinders Street Station chanting Intifada, Intifada shook me to my core. And what was even more terrifying is that this happened to some of my staff members who were trying to catch the train home. They videoed this, they sent it through to our WhatsApp group, and we were all just shaken to our core because we know what an intifada means. And when we see Australians, many of which probably have no idea what living through a real intifada means, condoning this type of Islamic extremism and terrorism, most of them, by the way, without any political affiliation with those who actually are causing intifadas. They're usually progressive left-leaning university students who are standing there and vandalising Flinders Street Station. It's quite terrifying to think, what is Australia willing to tolerate and accept in our society?
Alan, thank you so much for your time this evening. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Rita.
This week marks 4 years since we first heard the term COVID-19. 4 years and still no explanation. No justifiable reason has been given for the disproportionate, draconian response that saw millions of people locked in their homes, separated from loved ones, forced out of work, and children banned from school. In Victoria, children were banned from playgrounds. Labor established an inquiry, but critics argue it is not enough. It won't have the powers of a royal commission. It won't be able to compel former premiers to attend. Joining me now is One Nation Senator Malcolm Roberts. Senator, thank you for your time. Why is Labor resisting a royal commission?
Well, Rita, it's unlike you to miss a point, but you forgot the most important point of all. What was smashed during the COVID response was trust. Trust and truth were completely smashed, and the people need to be heard. What's wrong with the Labor or the Albanese review is that it doesn't have powers to inquire. It's an inquiry that can't inquire. And so people are not being heard. We've had several people still complaining that they want to be heard. Talk to people in the street. Talk to people in Parliament. People have had enough. They want to be heard, and that will rebuild trust.
Now, you had a hearing yesterday. A range of people spoke. Let's hear what Dr. Julie Sladden had to say.
There has been a catastrophic failure of medical ethics, human rights and free speech in this country. I know of no health emergency so great as to necessitate the locking up of healthy people for weeks on end.
We even had the Human Rights Commissioner, Lorraine Finlay, say this inquiry isn't the best option. So why Labor submit to a royal commission? At the end of the day, they weren't in power for the COVID-19 crisis. Surely there were some Labor premiers who may not want to testify, but the Albanese government, you would think, would want to get to the bottom of what happened and to make sure it never happens again.
That's exactly correct, Rita. You're right on the money there. Labor has got something to hide. We don't know what it is. We think it's protecting the state premiers, or maybe protecting its connections to Big Pharma. After all, the donations were released today, and Labor has been receiving money from Big Pharma again. So we don't know what they want to hide, but the thing is, they want to hide something. Their Labor committee, the chair of the Labor committee before the election, recommended a royal commission, an inquiry into COVID, recommended a royal commission. Albanese promised it, and now that he's in power, he's not delivering. And yet they had an inquiry into robo-debt just 3 months after they came into power. This is the COVID response is the most draconian, most far-reaching economic and human impact in this country ever. And they won't look at it.
It seems incredible that you would have a royal commission into robo-debt and not this. This something that impacted every single Australian, and the impact will be felt for many years to come. Senator Malcolm Roberts, thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thank you, Rita.
Coming up, my final thought, an old comedy sketch that's going viral and it's as relevant as ever. Welcome back. Now, here's a blast from the past. This sketch from John Safran is going viral again, and it's as relevant as ever. He calls out the hypocrisy, the empty posturing of left-wing activists in inner-city Melbourne who have signs up saying they're on Aboriginal land. But what happens when the local Indigenous community wants their land back?
Hello. Hello. We've seen your mark here on the wall. We're the Wurundjeri people.
Really? Yeah. Where you come in, we've seen the sign.
All right. See, we haven't got anywhere to stay, so we're thinking, we might just stay here for about 1 or 2 months or so.
We saw a sign there and we thought,
I don't
know about that. No, just us. No, because we won't be in much trouble. How did you know about it? With a sign. We saw that sign there.
We wouldn't ask only for the sign.
Oh, yeah, it's a sign. It's a sign there.
I know the sign. I don't know who's put it up there, so.
Oh, well, we'll just leave it in the back of the car. Cook up a feed.
There's some local rabbits we can hunt down and grab, cook it up. Yeah. If you like rabbit, we can share.
Yeah, get some witches rub for that.
No one's here at the moment. That's the problem. We can wait.
That's it from me. I'll see you Sunday morning for Outsiders. Up next is James Morrow with the US Report. Good night.